Good morning, everybody. As part of a special issue of the Canadian Modern Language Review on the teaching of French in minority contexts across Canada that I'm editing with my colleague Karla Culligan, this morning I have the pleasure of interviewing Karla Culligan and Amanda Battistuzzi, who wrote an article alongside Meike, Wernicke, and Masson. The article is titled Teaching French as a Second Language in Canada, Convergence, Points of Language, Professional Knowledge, and Mentorship from Teacher Preparation through the beginning years. How are you?
Great.
Thank you for taking the time to meet with me and talk about your very relevant article. This is meant to be conversational. I just have a few questions for you. The idea is to get some highlights on your paper, why you wrote it, and just to get a broad idea of its main results. My first question is for Amanda. Could you briefly present the highlights of your paper?
Definitely. So this article stemmed off from a larger study. So we wrote this article based on focus group data within the context of a large pan-Canadian study that was developed to address gaps and recommendations for teacher education for teachers of French as a second language, or FSL. So the focus group data was so rich that we thought there was lots more to do with it rather than only keeping it in the report. So that's where this article came from. So the focus group data allowed us to see some relationships between lots of different factors of teacher education, as well as early career teaching for FSL teachers across Canada. So there was some similarities across different regions, but then also some distinctions. Two key points that came out of the focus group data are these 2 points of convergence. The first, on a practical level, relates to questions of access. So what teachers have access to as they're becoming teachers and in their early years. And secondly, on an ideological level, how we conceptualize things in teacher education and in FSL teaching, such as how we think of language and how we think of mentorship. So those are kind of the 2 key points of the data from the focus groups.
That's great. And Karla, how did your team become interested in this topic? What made you want to do a study on these issues?
Well, I'm a former French immersion teacher myself, and now a teacher educator, as the team members all are. And in my program, we have an FSL specialization option. And so I'm so interested in this topic and passionate about this topic, how to provide not only high quality teacher education to prepare FSL teachers for the field, but also to look at how to support those teachers as they enter the field. So through their early years of teaching and beyond.
Yeah, and it's so important for them to get a sense of the reality that's going to be waiting for them, right? So really often in teacher education courses, we focus on theoretical issues, we focus on language, but there's also very pragmatic aspects to, the reality of what it is to teach French as a second language in a minority context, in a shortage context as well.
Absolutely.
Amanda, what methodology, you did mention it earlier, but could you develop on the methodology that your team used in order to answer your research questions?
For sure. So the larger study was a mixed methods study that involved quantitative and qualitative information. And we gathered this information through website scans. So the team surveyed all teacher education programs in Canada that offer a French as a second language option. We then provided surveys, and that's where we gathered the participants for the focus groups. And these surveys and focus groups were from key stakeholder groups related to FSL. So French as a second language teachers, district and board representatives. So those are things like French consultants or pedagogical coaches, those sorts of things, and representatives from faculties of education. So mostly professors. So the larger study was led by Dr. Stephanie Arnott and was funded by the Canadian Association of Second Language Teachers. And then we took, as Karla and I were both on the focus group subcommittee of that larger group, that's where the information for this article came from. The full report has just been posted on the CASALT website. So if you're interested in the larger project itself, you can find that information there. So this paper is only focus group data. So that process, we transcribed the focus groups, and then we used in vivo to conduct thematic analysis.
Mm-hmm. So how would you say that your text sheds light on different issues related to French language education in minority contexts, but more specifically in your context, the context of French immersion? What do you bring to the table in this paper?
Well, I think going back to this, going back to the focus groups, I think that that piece is so important. So I feel like this article really gives a voice to the key stakeholders in this journey, from FSL teacher education right through to early career FSL teaching. And I think the results really illustrate the true complexity of FSL teacher preparation and retention and support through the early years and throughout these teachers' careers. There really are no simple solutions. So I think, but by highlighting sort of the two key points of convergence, as we did in the paper, so this question of access and conceptualizations, all of us who are stakeholders in French language education in minority settings and in different programs, FSL, French immersion, can, maybe envision ways in which to support teacher candidates and early career teachers. I just think this is so important, and really it ultimately affects students, teachers, and French language education on the larger scale.
Mm-hmm. And learners, right? Your paper doesn't really focus on learners, but understanding this reality is in the long run going to help the learners, and it's going to help them develop their knowledge of French, but also develop a better relationship with the French language, recognize themselves as francophones, because really often in French immersion settings, these students they consider themselves second language learners. They don't really consider themselves francophones. So if we provide a more thorough understanding of their learning context, perhaps they will see themselves in the francophonie. Karla, Amanda, I want to thank you for your time this morning. Your paper, I'm going to remind the audience, is titled Teaching French as a Second Language in Canada, Convergence Points of Language, Professional Knowledge, and Mentorship from Teacher Preparation Through the Beginning Years. It is to be published in a special issue on French education in minority contexts in Canada. That's going to be from the Canadian Modern Language Review. Thank you for your time this morning, and I invite everybody to read your paper.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.